Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Yost, Chief of Staff at Commonwealth Fusion Systems. As we all know, the world needs a fundamentally new source of clean energy to meet our growing demands and combat climate change. And we believe that fusion is a key part of the answer. Next slide, please. So the company has always been founded on the principle that there should not have to be a trade-off between mitigating climate change while enabling and improving access to energy. And so Commonwealth Fusion Systems, we spun out of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center in 2018 to commercialize fusion energy by leveraging decades of fusion research and combining it with a new groundbreaking high-field superconducting magnet technology. We continue to collaborate with MIT. We're actually the largest private sponsor of research at MIT. To date, we've raised more than $2 billion from a diverse set of investors across the capital stack, from venture like Breakthrough Energy Ventures and Gates and Khosla and MIT's The Engine, to hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, of course, pensions, endowments, and large corporates, both notably in the energy industry, like oil and gas majors, Eni and Equinor, and the likes of Google. We've built a team of over 275 today. We're growing quickly with a track record of industrial hard tech manufacturing, engineering, and large-scale project execution from the likes of SpaceX, Tesla, the automotive industry, et cetera. So next slide, please. So first, why fusion energy? As you heard from Professor Ian Chapman, who referenced it in his presentation, it's a clean, abundant, safe source of energy. But what I want to highlight as a commercial entity is that it's also very economically competitive and inherently scalable. So the fuel is abundant, as Ian said, but essentially it's more like CapEx and OpEx. It uses such a small amount of fuel that you can show up the day of commissioning with a truck and have enough fuel to last the lifetime of the plant. It is inherently scalable. You can leverage existing infrastructure. It's in the shape of what the world knows what to do with. It's fundamentally a heat source. You can attach it to a traditional balance of plant. It performs as a firm dispatchable source of power, and it can leverage existing financing channels like project finance. And the power density is such that, we've done the math. In order to provide, 20% of the world's energy, we could do that with on the order of, 10 factories in the world that are on the industrial footprint of things that we already do today. And fundamentally, what we think this does is it shifts the world from where energy is a resource, we're in this hunter-gatherer mode of digging up from the ground or waiting for the wind to blow or sun to shine, to energy purely as a technology. It's a machine that you can build it and you have energy. With commercial fusion power, the world will have access to safe, low-cost electricity for billions of people for thousands of years. Next slide, please. And I think another point to mention is that it is truly a key to decarbonizing the world, not just the electricity sector. There are a lot of sectors where electrifying is not even an option. Things that are complementary to renewables as well, like hydrogen, other industrial processes. Ultimately, fusion is a high-quality dispatchable heat source. So from a commercial point of view, the business model and markets are diverse and large. You can pick and choose the report, but one thing is clear, either tens to hundreds of trillions of dollars will be deployed on energy infrastructure by 2050. And so no matter what mix of renewables, hydrogen storage, and any sort of decarbonizing of the industrial sector you predict, it is highly complementary. Next slide, please. So fusion, why now? What's changed? Many of you might know the old adage of it always being 30 years away. And as you heard from Ian, scientists have been working on fusion for more than half a century, and we're on the cusp of the key milestone, net fusion energy gain, more energy out than in. You'll hear people refer to it as Q. Machines that are the closest are called tokamaks. Essentially, they're magnetic bottles. They hold and insulate the plasma. And we've successfully constructed and studied many of them around the world. We've built roughly over 150 to date and have proven high performance, including the record set by JET, as Ian just told you about. And as a result, the international scientific community has basically designated the Project Eavor as a tokamak. But we've known that due to the limits of magnet technology, when Eavor was designed in the 90s, it had to be an enormous size on the order of several football fields, the largest construction project in Europe, resulting in a very complex project with long time horizons and high costs on the order of decades and over $30 billion. But it was always known that with better magnets, we could drastically increase performance. And that's what CFS is founded upon. We are leveraging a new class of material, a material called high temperature superconductors, to build significantly stronger magnets in a much, much smaller size. CFS's magnets enable high performance in a smaller and ultimately economical form factor. In September, we actually completed a 3-year program successfully demonstrating this revolutionary type of magnet at scale. It is the most powerful superconducting magnet ever built. The field exceeded 20 Tesla, roughly 2 times what's available today, and unlocks the path to commercial fusion energy in our minds. Next slide. As you heard from Ian, there's been a lot of activity in the space, and importantly, more so than not just only governments. There are now over 35 private companies and more than $4 billion have been invested into the space. Government programs continue to ramp up. The global landscape in our minds sort of self-organizes roughly on this 2x2 axis. On the one side, you have very high confidence physics, in the landscape of projects being built, but large, slow, and commercial projects like Eavor that are really meant to be a scientific tool, but not something to be economical. On the other, you have a very small, fast, iterative approaches through many other startups using different types of building machines, but are all based on machine approaches that have higher physics risk and less established historical performance. In our minds, CFS's path leverages the best of both worlds by combining our magnet technology with the tokamak approach. And ultimately, this visual is the scale where we can build a machine called Spark that's roughly 1/40th the size of Eavor. Next slide, please. So we are on an accelerated trajectory driven by taking the largest engineering risk out first. Really, our company is built around, of course, the mitigation of climate change. So we spun out of MIT. We've demonstrated many of our team has built and operated tokamaks at MIT. We've demonstrated our magnet technology at scale. We are now building a machine called Spark, a tokamak that will demonstrate Q greater than 1 in 2025. This is a machine that's been peer-reviewed, published, high confidence that the physics is sound, and we are now constructing this. Then we go on to build our first commercial fusion power plant, ARC, on the grid in early 2030s. Next slide, please. And as I said, we are deep in execution mode building Spark. We have a 47-acre site in Devens, Massachusetts, where we have a fusion campus. We have the environmental permits. Regulatory path is established distinct from fission. It's regulated more like a hospital, cancer treatment center. The community is engaged and excited, and we are also vertically integrating, building our magnet factory on site. Spark and ARC we're moving in to do production for Spark early this year, all towards demonstration of positive net fusion energy, Q greater than 1 for the first time in human history in 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ali. You should be very proud of you and your colleagues. Spark looks extremely promising. And I like what you said there about energy, or if we're looking at fusion as energy purely as a technology. I loved that. Of course, it's being safe and low cost and inherently scalable. So we are moving back from fusion back to hydrogen now, making sure that's at scale. We have a gentleman, Mr. Talmon Marco, tuning in live from California. He's the co-founder and CEO of H2 Pro to showcase about affordable green hydrogen production at scale. We are all ears as well. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As said, my name is Talmon Marco. I am the CEO of H2 Pro. So our goal overall as a company is to make hydrogen at scale available for $1 per kilogram, green hydrogen. And the UN set this goal for 2050. Our hope is that we can get there by the end of this decade. Next. Looking at the company, we were founded in 2019, so relatively new company. Like Ali's company, also spun out of academia. We come from the Technion, Israeli university. Today, we're about 100 people. Next year, we're going to deliver our first megawatt scale pilots and lots of IP and lots of great investors. Next. To date, we've raised over $100 million from the likes of Breakthrough Energy, Temasek, very grateful for their contribution, and multiple industrial players like Yara and ArcelorMittal. Next. So in order to explain what we do, we need to explain what traditional electrolysis does. And traditional electrolysis, the kind that has been around for well over 150 years, there's two types. You have alkaline, goes back to the mid-19th century. You have PEM, goes back to the mid-20th century. There are certain differences between the two, but for the sake of this presentation, we're going to treat them as one. In both cases, you take a power source, two electrodes, a cathode and anode, you turn on the power, and you get bubbles. In theory, you can do this with 1.5 or 1.48 volts. However, in the real world, you need more like 2 volts. And the reason for this, in a simplified way, has to do with the fact that you're generating your oxygen in, actually, it's the oxygen and not the hydrogen, in an electrochemical way. Because you're generating oxygen electrochemically, you need a certain overpotential. And that overpotential translates into heat. So you need more like 2 volts. You can think of it as an old style incandescent light bulb. You want 10 watts of light, but you need to spend 100 watts and the other 90 become heat. So the same here. The other challenge has to do with the fact that oxygen and hydrogen are generated in the same time and the same space. And you want to prevent these two from mixing, because you mix hydrogen and oxygen, you add a spark, and kaboom. To prevent this, you place a membrane. The membrane is delicate, is sensitive. The distance between the cathode and the anode is under 1 millimeter, and this translates into expensive. The membrane, and with PEM also certain materials like iridium, are the main source of cost with electrolyzers, and that contributes to the capex. So you have high capex and high opex. That's pretty much the state of the union as it is today, which brings us to what we do in the next slide. So again, you take 2 electrodes, a cathode and anode, the power source, you turn on the power, you get hydrogen, but you do not get oxygen. Instead of getting oxygen, the anode, which is a special kind of anode, which is more like a battery anode, gets charged. So only hydrogen is produced. Now, you don't need a deep chemical background to know that you cannot charge an electrode, you cannot charge a battery forever. Eventually, it fills up. And when that happens, we do 2 things. Next slide. The first thing we do is we turn off the power. And the other one, we replace the electrolyte with a hot electrolyte. And when the anode is heated up, the same thing happens that happens in a battery. It discharges. The discharge is the release of that oxygen, which was used to charge the battery. And so because this release of oxygen is not electrochemical, but rather it's a thermally activated chemical reaction, we don't need that overpotential. And so we go back and forth between generating hydrogen and oxygen. And the end result is high efficiency. We're going to be at about 95% efficiency as a system. We demonstrated close to 99% efficiency. The other advantage has to do with the fact that oxygen and hydrogen are separated by time, so we don't need a membrane. This makes the whole design of the system a lot easier. Next slide. If you look at the system, we have multiple of these cells, thousands of these cells, some generating hydrogen, others generating oxygen. So a single cell does not generate hydrogen continuously, but the system does, because while some parts generate hydrogen, others generate oxygen. Moving on.
I found this on the web.
She did. To summarize, 95% efficiency, no rare earth metals, no membrane, highest efficiency, lowest capex. Next. Moving on. In terms of where we are in the roadmap, we started in 2019 generating 0.00002 kilograms a day. We now have a system producing 10 kilograms a day. By the end of this year, we will be at 200 kilograms a day. In 2024, 2025, we're going to be with commercial system in the range of doing tens of megawatts. Next year, we'll have our first pilots that will be demonstrating this technology with customers. Next. Looking at how we build it, just to understand, we take an anode, the cathode, in this case, or always, and put them one on top of the other with a spacer between them so they don't short circuit. This is not to be confused with the membrane. We roll them just like you would roll a battery. Next slide. Place them one on top of the other, which then we put them into a cylinder, which we refer to as a cell pack, and a bunch of cell packs create a set. These are the cell packs. This is where the magic happens. Moving on to the next slide. Our systems are comprised of three components: those cell packs, where we generate hydrogen, power electronics, and a balance of plant. Moving on. If you're looking at the large system, you'll see a single balance of plant and multiple of these units, either containerized or on skids, that do the water splitting. Next. Our first factory will become operational next year in mid-2023 with a nameplate capacity of 600 megawatts. Next. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Talmon. And congratulations, that pilot is up and running. I believe you said next year as well. And hopefully by 2025, a commercial system will be realized. So it's really incredible to see that both with Talmon and obviously with Ali before that academia, you know, when we're looking at the educational system and when we're working together with students and professors and in that community, what we can really achieve together at scale, which is so, so exciting. And with that, it is our final 7-minute rapid fire pitch from another startup also coming to us from the United States, from California, dialing in live. We have Mr. John Redfern, who's the president and CEO of Eavor Technologies. So he's going to walk us through what it means to have a truly scalable form of clean baseload and dispatchable power using geothermal energy this time. John, over to you.
Thank you. Also, with 7 minutes, I'm going to run through it rather than walk through it, but it's truly a privilege to be here and follow the cool kids in the block, fusion and hydrogen. I'll try to do my best, although we're only a geothermal company, but we think that's exciting in its own right. Next slide, please. So we've been around about 5 years, and we started on the singular proposition that, you know, geothermal energy was going to be a significant part of the solution to the energy crisis, and that closed loop geothermal, Everloop, was going to be the real core of that. And it was a bit of an audacious bet when we first made it 5 years ago, but I think things are coming along, and more people are accepting our route toward things. We've raised about $100 million, not as much as the fusion guys, but put together a world-class team. We've had a full-scale field demo that's been working nonstop exactly as it should since 2019. And we're going forward from there. I'd also like to point out that our single largest shareholder is in fact from Singapore, Vickers Venture Partners. And that, along with Temasek, mean that this is more Singaporean technology than it is any other country. So not trying to bring something to Singapore, but hopefully repatriating it and bringing it back home. Next slide, please. So what is our technology and why is it different than traditional geothermal? Well, traditional geothermal is a lot like oil, almost identical to oil and gas. It's an exploration game looking for a rare, permeable aquifer of just the right type from which you're going to produce a fluid. In oil and gas, you'd be producing an hydrocarbon from that rock. In the case of traditional geothermal, you'd be producing some hot brine. We're completely different than that. We're not attached to the local geology. We're not injecting or extracting a fluid. We're just using modern oil and gas techniques to drill a massive 50-kilometer plus radiator kilometers below the surface, and through that massive surface area, gradually harvest heat solely through conduction. And that change makes all the difference and has a whole bunch of other positive knock-on effects, as we'll talk about in future slides. Next slide. In fact, we think there's such a difference that really what we've created here is a whole new energy category. Current commercial oil and gas or coal power sources, they're scalable and they're firm, but they're not very clean. The new clean ones like wind and solar with batteries, sure, they're scalable, sure, they're clean, but they're not firm. And what the world really needs to complete the decarbonization process, decarbonizing heat, decarbonizing power sources, 100%, is they need something that's firm, scalable, and clean all at the same time, preferably dispatchable. Next, please. And why is that important? That's important because we're facing, twin existential threats basically to humanity. One is the climate change, for which we got to double down on the energy transition. But the other one that's really come to the fore is energy security or energy resilience. And we've noticed that before in the past with grid instability from intermittent sources that have been triggered by snowstorms in Texas to brush fires in California. But it's the invasion of the Ukraine and the realization of just how precarious people's international supplied energy is that cause people really to look at this again. And Eavor is the ultimate solution for that. Next slide, please. So why is Eavor the best possible solution for that? It's not just that it's firm and scalable and clean all at the same time. It's more than firm. It's lossless load following, which allows it to pair nicely with solar. It's distributable, so it gets rid of the NIMBY problem. It's predictable, so it's easy to finance with a low weighted average cost of capital. It also it has a low surface footprint, which may not be crucial in a place like Nevada, but in Europe it certainly is. In a place like Singapore, it's absolutely crucial. It also doesn't just play in the electricity market like wind and solar, but it helps decarbonization in tough to reach areas like district heating, which again is highly critical if the Russian gas is being shut off. And it has no mining tail. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you decrease your carbon intensity by getting rid of coal and gas, but you replace it with wind and solar and batteries may not have much in terms of carbon production, but they are materials intensive. So you may be saying goodbye to petrostates like Russia or Saudi Arabia, but you'd be saying hello to cobalt from the Congo and rare earth minerals from China. It's from the frying pan into the fire, literally. Only Eavor cuts out both the carbon intensity and the material intensity, and that makes it this critical element that can not only provide dispatchable power and direct heat, but really delivers energy autonomy. Next slide, please. The other thing that's good is because our thing, we're not a developer, we're not an energy company, we're a technology provider, and our IP can provide anyone freedom to operate cover, and we will license our technology to any operator who's interested in building their own Everloop. And that's super important because we're a company of only 50 people, and we can't do everything on our own, but we need people like our partners, BP, Chevron, Temasek, whoever, and dozens others. We need to be able to equip them with all the tools and IP necessary so they and their infrastructure can really scale the technology and move the needle on climate change. Next slide, please. But before we license that technology to anyone else, we've got to prove it commercially ourselves. We have our demo project in Alberta that's been running several years. We've got a full-scale commercial project coming or breaking ground in October of this year, so very soon, in Bavaria, and that's about $250 million project. If we built out the entire license area, it'd be a €2 billion project, and that proves up the technology using our oil and gas technology that's designed for sedimentary rock. The other exciting thing is we have another well being drilled in New Mexico this year that will be, once it's completed in October this year, the deepest commercial onshore well in history, and that'll prove our technology down to about 7 kilometers and 400 degrees C. And once you get down to those sort of temperatures, it's hot if you can go deep enough anywhere. That really opens up the dream of geothermal anywhere. But in addition to that, next slide, we've built up a prospect portfolio of about 200 projects around the world. I'm not going to delve into that because I think I'm almost out of time. Next slide. And I'll then instead end with a call to action for Singapore, perhaps suggest a moonshot for Singapore. Autonomy is something that's important for a place like Singapore. But to have water autonomy, through your smart water plants or new water plants and desalination, you need energy. In fact, to have any independence, you need energy independence, not just for maintaining clear, critical water supplies, but for the subways, the hospitals, the military, you name it. And the only way in a place like Singapore that imports 95% of its energy needs through hydrocarbons, to achieve that is through something that's indigenous, and the only indigenous energy source in Singapore that can support the country without imports is Everloop. So I'd say let's use Singapore's world famous ability of planning and implementation and do with Ever what they've already done with the new water. That's my dream. Anyway, thank you very much.